Okay, we might get started. The numbers look great. It's excellent to have a turnout to this forum. Welcome to those who now have just joined again. My name is Ben White. I'm chairing today's forum. I lead our stakeholder and environment services for Project Marinus. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Marinus Link Regulatory Investment Test for Transmission Supplementary Analysis Report Forum. It's a mouthful and a half, I know, but a very important forum that we are very pleased to have you attend. And many of you have participated and provided fantastic feedback to us over the course of our RIT-T process. And this again is another great juncture for your participation and feedback. And hopefully we can today share with you some useful insights and have a great conversation around the work, not only we're doing, but work that is going on right across the national electricity market. Before I do introduce our speakers and the agenda today, I do want to acknowledge the First Peoples of the lands, the waterways and the skies by which we gather today. And really this is across the country. So it's a great reflection to look at the importance and the value of our First Peoples and the contribution they make to our great country and our great society. And also just to recognise we are expecting around 50 attendees today and a great representation from consumer groups to government departments and agencies, large generators, large and small energy users, industry representatives, and also specialist consultancies. So welcome everybody, and we'll get underway. We've got a full agenda and we're making sure we reserve plenty of time for questions and answers in a panel session. Now, before we get to that, I just want to advise this webinar is being recorded live and will be made available on our website at www.marinuslink.com.au. And for stakeholders who cannot make this session, we will be distributing this live recording to them. To make the session easy and flow well, your microphones and cameras will be turned off. So if you have a question, and we really encourage you to bring forward questions at any time today, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. There is a chat function usually in this mode, but that too is being disabled just to ensure we don't have too many distractions. But if you're having technical issues, please, if you could message the host and ask for assistance. We intend to move through the presentations and address questions at the end. And as I mentioned before, there is also dedicated time to a panel session with our presenters today. But we encourage you to type questions as they come to mind into the relevant section. There's also a voting function. It's a vote up process. If you see a question that you like and wish to have answered, please vote for that. It's a thumbs up icon that helps to elevate that question in its priority. And I'll be going through as many of those questions as we possibly can today. If we do run out of time and your question is not raised or answered, we will undertake to make sure all questions are followed up out of session through emails and other means. Also, submissions to the Marinus Link RIT-T Supplementary Analysis Report do close on the 7th of December, noting the report was released publicly on the 5th of November, and it is also available on our website. So this is our agenda today. As I said, it's a full agenda, and we really want to get through as much of the content as we can to share with you, but then reserve that time to have a very good discussion. we'll be going through an overview of the project, the feedback we have received from stakeholders through our RIT-T process. We'll be talking about the 2020 Integrated System Plan from the Australian Energy Market Operator and how Marinus Link fits into the context of that. We'll be talking through the new analysis, the inputs, assumptions, sensitivities that we have incorporated as part of our supplementary report, and we'll talk about those outcomes, and then we will have a deeper dive set of analysis and overview of that modelling and insight. Then we'll go to a Q&A panel, and we'll cover as many of those questions, as I said, from you as we can. This isn't just the only port of call to be engaged. We welcome you to participate and share across your networks the work we're doing, and call for that engagement as we go. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Bess Clark. Bess is the General Manager of Project Marinus here at Tas Networks, who will take us through her presentation. Thanks very much, Bess.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to everyone who's joined us here today. I'm just going to recap on what's been an extraordinary year, really, in the energy sector and in life in general in 2020. So Australia continues to see an energy transition at significant pace as we move to cleaner energy resources. And we're doing that in a world that's also still grappling with the effects of COVID-19. We at Tas Networks have continued to progress the work for what we call Project Marinus, and Project Marinus comprises the Marinus Link high voltage direct current land and sea cable, converter stations, and then the supporting upgrades to the Tasmanian Northwest Transmission Network to move the energy between Tasmania and Victorian generation and load centres. And we've continued to progress that project through the early design and approvals phase. And that's been progressed through a $56 million Commonwealth Government grant to the Tasmanian Government. We were pleased to have announced earlier this year that the Prime Minister has also included Marinus as one of 15 key infrastructure projects for the nation to support Australia's economic recovery. And that reflects that in addition to providing benefits to the energy sector, Marinus also provides regional benefits to communities in Tasmania and Victoria in particular. And that is really a fast tracking or a more streamlined environmental assessment process where there's no reduction in the quality of work that's required for that assessment, but a more streamlined assessment process to take on board that information. We're really pleased that AEMO's 2020 ISP included Marinus Link in it as an actionable project with decision rules, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And the Prime Minister also announced on the back of that ISP release a $250 million interconnector fund, and that is to support timely progress on Project Energy Connect between South Australia and New South Wales, VNI, Victoria, New South Wales Interconnector West, and Marinus Link. So very strong support from the Commonwealth to see these interconnector projects progress. And of course, there's been a whole range of other national and state energy policy frameworks that continue to be progressed with various announcements, indeed even in the most recent weeks. So, and in Tasmania, our government has legislated 200% by 2040 Tasmanian renewable energy target, which we affectionately call TRET. So a lot on. And in that context, we've updated our regulatory investment test analysis. So we published our draft report about a year ago in December, and we got lots of feedback on that draft report. And so the two key bits of feedback were that we needed to take on board the work AEMO was doing in its integrated system plan, and also need to consider the evolving rule set around how that integrated system plan became actionable. So we've updated our economic analysis, and that analysis has highlighted that based on and building from AEMO's ISP, a 1500 megawatt Marinus link built in 2 stages, together with that supporting upgrades to the Tasmanian transmission network, provides net benefits across the range of future outlooks that we considered. And so that's really positive, because in a year where there's been a lot of change, a lot of updated inputs, it shows that the RIT-T analysis is still robust and Marinus Link still provides those benefits in this fast-moving market. We've looked at the actionable ISP rules and the supporting guidelines released by the Australian Energy Regulator, and we propose to apply those rules to have one regulatory investment test for the whole Marinus scope, and then actually progress the implementation of the project and the revenue recovery as a stage project. So revenue will be recovered once we've satisfied the AEMO feedback loop for each stage. So in setting the scene, we've released the report. It's available for review. Today's forum is to provide some more context on it, and we really welcome submissions on our analysis by the 7th of December, so that can inform the work we do to finalise the RIT-T process in our conclusions report. Thanks, Pratik. The next slide. So just to recap on what is it we're talking about. So Project Marinus has this high voltage direct current subsea cable across Bass Strait in the order of 250 kilometres of subsea cable. There's actually 2 sets of cables, each with 750 megawatts of capacity. In Tasmania and Victoria, there are converter stations at the ends of each set of cables, and they convert that direct current, they connect that direct current energy to alternating current to connect to the backbone networks in Victoria and in Tasmania. And in Victoria, we're proposing to connect into the Hazelwood area, with the Hazelwood terminal substation having significant capacity, not least because of the retirement of the Hazelwood power station. So there's capacity effectively to plug straight in to the network in that region in Victoria. In Tasmania, plugging in a 1500 megawatt interconnector requires basically the interconnector needs to extend deeper into the network to allow that power flow. So in Tasmania, we're proposing an upgrade to the existing high voltage alternating current network to move that energy between the generation and load centres. And we've got more details in our RIT-T documentation, and the description is consistent with the description that AEMO used in its ISP. We just note there's some change staging detail for the supporting transmission, which just reflects the best arrangement to support power system security as we build these assets. So next slide. So in terms of our outlook, we have completed a feasibility and business case assessment that was funded by ARENA, the Renewable Energy Agency, and also with support from the Tasmanian government through Tas Networks. That was a 2-year piece of work which demonstrated that the project was technically viable and commercially feasible as a regulated link. And we were really fortunate because that work allowed us to do a lot of really good analysis to work out broad route corridors, early engineering work, early environment and planning work, cost build-ups, revenue analysis, etc. So we've started this project from a really sound analytical base. And as part of that feasibility and business case assessment, we released the draft RIT-T. We have then got that Commonwealth funding to support us through the early design and approvals work. And as part of that, we continued to engage with stakeholders, including AEMO, with that ISP released in the middle of the year. Our supplementary analysis report released earlier this month. And then we've got a number of years to continue the work required to get the project to an investment decision. So we need to do all the engagement with communities and landowners on the proposed routes. We need to do the relevant environmental studies and analysis to support the environmental approvals across Tasmania, Commonwealth waters and into Victoria. And we need to do all the engineering to make this link work in a power system that's fast evolving. We need to do all the procurement and commercial analysis to have a viable business case. So there's a whole range of work to progress the design and approvals. And we anticipate that we'll have that work completed to a point to reach a final investment decision around the 23-24 financial year. And then it's in the order of 4 years to have the equipment manufactured, installed, and then commissioned to ensure it can release that full capacity to the market. And we're proposing that the first 750 megawatts could be in service by the 27-28 financial year, and the second link in the order of 2 to 3 years later. So next slide, please. So in terms of the draft report we released last year, we received a number of submissions, 15 in total, in terms of formal submissions, and we also received a range of feedback by other means. And as I mentioned earlier, a key bit of feedback was that we needed to align with the work AEMO was doing, which obviously of itself engaged a huge amount of consultation and modelling around the future market outlook. And so we have updated, and Stephen and others will talk a bit more about the work we've done in that respect. We were rightly asked to look at uncertainty and how that was factored into forecasts, particularly as COVID-19 was starting to affect the outlook for the world from early this calendar year. There was general support, not unanimous support, for a staged approach to the link, so that we built the link as and when the market required it. There was a request that we consider non-network solutions, and I guess inherently the model we use considers a world without Marinus link and a world with Marinus link. And so the world without Marinus link can consider non-network solutions in particular, but actually the work we build on from AEMO has a whole range of customer response and demand side solutions, together with solutions such as local generation, etc. So non-network solutions are inherently considered in the work we've done. And another big theme, which the RIT-T notionally doesn't deal with, but which is really important for this project and for customers, is that it's not enough to have a net economic benefit. It's that we then have to make sure that the customers who realise that benefit are paying for the service costs of Marinus. So thanks, Prateek. Prateek's our slide master in the background, helping move the slides. So thanks, Prateek. I'll move to the next slide. So as I've said, working out who pays is a really key question for Marinus Link. And certainly the Tasmanian government has made it very clear that, and TasNetworks has made it very clear that this project will only proceed where we have a fair and reasonable cost allocation. Essentially, the present national electricity transmission pricing model is all about where are the assets physically located. So the framework for Marinus Link in a normal world would say about half will be paid for by Tasmania and about half will be paid for by Victoria. But the analysis we've done in our RIT-T and also some further work we've undertaken shows that Tasmania gets some benefit, Victoria gets greater benefit, but actually New South Wales gets a lot of benefit, and also Queensland and South Australian customers benefit from Marinus Link. It helps to actually provide a lower cost solution right across the national market. And so we need to find a framework that better matches the costs and the benefits. So that was recognised. The Energy Security Board acknowledged that matter, in particular in relation to Marinus Link, and COAG asked the ESB to do some further analysis on that. Separate to that, TAS Networks, we've engaged FTI Consulting to undertake analysis, not just of the, if you like, the RIT-T resource cost benefits, but the wholesale energy customer benefits from Marinus Link. So we are progressing that work and hope to share that publicly in coming months. And the work from was the COAG Energy Ministers and is now the Energy National Cabinet Reform Committee. That work is continuing to look at this pricing matter. And as I've said, it's acknowledged that it's a fundamental matter to resolve. And in fact, AEMO has included resolution of that as a decision rule for the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bess. And again, I'm sure and can see some questions coming through. So just a reminder to those who may have just joined the presentations, we'll get through those first and hold questions to the panel session that's coming up. Just to keep to time, it's a pleasure now to introduce Eli Pack, who is the Manager of Integrated System Planning at the Australian Energy Market Operator. In his role, he coordinates major transmission planning activities with a whole wide range of stakeholders and to support an efficient investment in the power system. So Eli will take us through the 2020 Integrated System Plan with Marinus Link in context. Over to you, Eli. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm here to discuss the Integrated System Plan. I'll call it the ISP, and based on the time we've got available today, I'll provide a little bit of context around the ISP itself, jump into a handful of insights that are relevant to Project Marinus, and then highlight the process that we're already moving forward through for the next ISP. So jumping into the next slide, the ISP, this slide, yep. The ISP establishes a whole of system plan for the efficient development of the power system. It does that by using a transparent and quantitative approach, using scenario analysis to identify an optimal development path. And that's essentially a series of investments that are considered to be prudent across time. So while the ISP sets out this whole system plan, the transmission network service providers like TAS Networks are required to then assess the individual components of that plan under the Regulatory Investment Test or RIT-T framework. And that's why we're here today. I will highlight that the main goal of the ISP is to maximize value to consumers, and that it provides a wealth of information to other stakeholders and helps to inform decisions along the way. So moving on to the next slide, what we see here is a bit of a window into the ISP process itself. This was an 18-month project that finished in July this year. And through that process, we engaged, I would say, at least far more than 200 stakeholders. We held 8 workshops that were all very large public workshops and received 85 written submissions to our consultation processes, which we catalogued, published, and responded to and published on our website. We hosted 4 different public webinars as well, and that resulted really in a wide range of considerations that we've applied across our scenarios. And we used this scenario-based approach to explore how those considerations could affect different futures of the world. So that looked at things like grid technology and services, the uptake of distributed energy resources like rooftop PV, the different trajectory of emissions reductions, and how policy and other incentives could vary that rate of change. We looked at different economic growths and policies, and we highlighted different market reforms that may need to take place to enable that future. This resulted in a wide range of changes out to 2040. One of the important ones, which we'll explore, is coal power station retirements. We're seeing in the vicinity of 15 gigawatts of retirements based largely on the aging fleet that's out there today, in the vicinity of 200% uptake of distributed energy resources, 26 gigawatts of variable renewable energy like wind and solar farms, and a huge amount of dispatchable capacity to support those variable renewable energy resources. So moving on to the next slide, we can take a bit of a closer look at the power station closures. So in the top right of this slide, Pratik, if you can move on, we see the retired capacity of power stations across the NEM. I'm not sure if it's just my screen it's not updating, but we should be seeing power station closures. There we go. So what's happening is that this fleet of power stations is simply approaching the end of their technical life, and they need to be replaced with other plant. What we're seeing based on our analysis is that the dominant provider of bulk energy will be a combination of wind and solar farms, and that those will need to be supported by more firm energies like storages and continued use of gas powered generation. What we see in the bottom left chart is how that rate of change can vary across scenarios. So in this bottom left chart, we're looking at essentially across our scenarios between a slow change world where the energy transition happens slower and power stations extend their technical life through investments, through to a step change scenario where it just becomes simply uneconomic to keep some of these plants around as long as they're currently planned. And that has a profound impact on the energy across the power system. So if we jump onto the next slide, what you'll see here is a dotted line, a red dotted line through the middle of this curve, which shows the dispatchable capacity over time. This is for our step change scenario. So what we're seeing is that we expect, based on the needs of the system, that this aging fleet of power stations will be replaced. Investments in storage will dominate the market, and that'll be supported by a huge amount of investment in wind and solar. So the wind in green, the solar and distributed solar or rooftop solar in sort of pale yellow up the top, they're really projected to provide a really key role in terms of providing energy into the system. And I found it quite interesting to look at this dotted line and see how the dispatchable capacity is maintained. But we certainly got challenged in our consultation around whether or not that would provide a reliable system. So we might explore that in the next two slides. In this next slide, what we're seeing is the role for storage, especially we're exploring this slide, the role for deep storages. And we've got storages of different depths modeled in our system. So in this top right slide, what we see is the sort of the charge of our storages across seasons. So you start in coming into the winter in this curve, where the storages are drawn down naturally because we just have less energy coming into the system. There's less PV in those winter months, and the storages slowly become depleted. As you come out of the winter and into spring, we get on average more energy being produced across the system, and those longer term storages build up. You get more and more charge, and that prepares us for the summer peaks. In this chart, you see two sort of divots where we go through some peak demand conditions, and the storages deplete somewhat, but they remain relatively high. The storages increase through autumn and then decline again when you go into the winter months. So looking at the next chart, what we see here is, sorry, the previous slide still, the bottom chart. What we see here is the variable renewable energy installed across the system on the x-axis. And as that increases, what we see is that the proportion of dispatchable capacity that's made up of storage increases. What that means is essentially that there's a natural pairing to some degree in what's optimal. As you get more energy that's intermittent, there becomes more value in storage. And that makes it harder for fuel-based technologies to compete. So moving on to the next slide, this chart explores a week in the future with low output from solar and wind farms. This one's interesting to look at because it really challenges what do the different services do in this sort of week. So what you see here is the yellow blocks in the middle. That's the output from solar, utility and distributed solar each day. And obviously there's not a lot happening in the night for this week. And then the wind farms in green. And this is a week where we've got very low output compared to a typical week. The demand is, or the customer load is shown as a dotted line. And the goal of our market modeling is essentially to demonstrate whether or not we can meet that demand with the resources we have at hand. So in this future period, what happens is the coal generation continues to play a base load role in black. It has some flexibility and ramps down through the middle of the day and up in the evenings. And you've got a very important, a critical role, I would say, for energy storages, hydro and gas powered generation, really providing a lot more flexibility and energy shifting to make sure that we can meet that supply demand. So I realize that's a complex chart, but we will need to move on to the next slide, which takes us to one of our critical outputs from that ISP. This is the optimal development path for transmission. And while today's session is about Marinus Link, it's critical to consider the role that Marinus plays in a bigger puzzle. Our modeling demonstrated a clear pathway for the development of the NEM transmission network. And this slide outlines the optimal development path for the NEM power system as we identified in the ISP. We categorized our projects into these 4 different groupings based on their urgency. In gray, we've got the projects that are committed. Those projects they've already passed the regulatory test. They've already been funded. And then in green, we've got the actionable projects. In some instances, these might not be needed for another 10 years, but they are very large and complex projects. So those projects we do need to get moving on straight away. And then in orange, we've got some longer term projects. For these projects, we identified that they could become actionable. They might become urgent soon, but we really wanted to have better information to make decisions on. So we've asked the local TNSPs, the transmission companies, to increase the accuracy of their costs and design and feed it into the next ISP so that we can make a more informed decision next time. And finally, the red projects are longer term projects that we're continuing to monitor year on year. So from this, it's fairly clear based on our modeling, that as the power system evolves, there will need to be a series of investments that enable a safe, secure, reliable, and sustainable power system. And it's going to be paramount that stakeholders, like all of you attending today, can challenge and collaborate with us as we refine individual components of this plan, like Marinus Link. And like any investment, these projects should not be built at any cost, which brings me to the next slide. So because of the level of uncertainty across the energy sector and the scale of some of these projects, we've identified what we call decision rules, which guides whether or not they should go ahead based on different parameters. So in the interest of time, I'll only speak to the Marinus Link decision rules, but I've left the other one on VNI West. There, VNI West is a project to increase capacity between Victoria and New South Wales. But for Marinus Link, what we identified was that the early works on Marinus should commence as soon as possible. And then the first stage, which is the first link, would be urgent in the case that TRIT is legislated, which I believe has happened over the past week. But there were absolutely outstanding issues relating to cost recovery, which Bess mentioned earlier. So if we find ourselves resolving cost recovery, and since TRIT is legislated, we would want to proceed with this first cable as soon as possible, as long as we don't find evidence that we're in a slow change scenario, and that evidence would be through extensions of the operating lives of coal plant investments in coal-fired generation. In terms of the second link, what we found was that there's still time. There's no race to make a decision on the second link. So while it was absolutely valuable in some of our scenarios, what we identified here was that it would be best to make a decision on the next link in the next ISP. I'll discuss that in just a minute. So moving on to the next slide, I thought I'd just briefly point out some of the resources, because it has been a long process, the ISP project. There's been a huge amount of engagement, and we're really trying to increase the transparency of information that we provide on our website. So yeah, please have a look through our website and the content we've got. There's a huge number of reports, but there's also more interactive ways of navigating our data. There's an interactive map. There's a lot of databases and spreadsheets and overview documents. I won't dwell on this slide in the interest of time. I'll move on to my last slide, which is about how to get involved in the next ISP. So the ISP is a project that we run every 2 years, although it takes approximately 2 years to do the project. So we are well underway in starting the 2022 ISP. I'm sure some of you on the line have attended some of our workshops. We've had a series of workshops already. We're just finalizing our consumer panel, and we'll be publishing a draft input, assumption and scenario report in December, and that will set out how we treat policy, economic drivers, demand growth, DER, a huge number of factors, including transmission upgrades. So yeah, I'd encourage you to get involved in this process. There'll be many opportunities to do so. If you'd like to hear about the workshops, please sign up to our mailbox. Just email isp@amo.com.au and we'll make sure you're informed. Otherwise, you can find everything you need on our website. So that's all I have today. Thank you for listening to me. I'll be around for the Q&A panel at the end. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eli. A fascinating presentation, and thank you too for sticking around to join us on the panel. And it's a good reminder for those who have some questions, please come forward, put your questions into the Q&A function, or if you see a question there that you like and want prioritised, give it a thumbs up and it'll raise to the surface, and we'll make sure the panel address those priority projects in the first instance. So without further ado, I'd like now to introduce Stephen Clark, who is the Project Director for the Marinus Link component of Project Marinus, and he will take us through a bit of a deeper dive of the analysis done as part of our supplementary report. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome everyone. Okay, on next slide, thanks, Pratik. Okay, so in terms of the results of our analysis, this slide, well, somewhat complicated, shares the results, and the big takeaway is that our results when we reran the analysis with AMO's latest assumptions for the ISP and actually an updated load forecast broadly aligns with the 2020 ISP outcomes. So that gave us a lot of comfort that even though we used different modelling tools, if you use the same inputs, you get the same answer pretty much. So so that was a real positive there from our perspective. I'm just might just check that my microphone is actually working properly. That's right, I'm using the wrong one. I'll just. Okay, hopefully that's a bit better. Let me just double check that. Yep, okay. Okay, so
Yeah, so our results are broadly aligned with the ISP. So on the right-hand side, you can see the timing that we tested for each of the scenarios, and we aligned our scenarios with the 2020 ISP scenarios. In there, you can see that for the step change scenario, as Eli mentioned for the ISP results, that our analysis also confirmed that if you're in a step change world, you need to build Marinus as soon as you can, which is the 27, 28 in that area in there. For a range of the other scenarios, so central, fast change and high DER, we're seeing that the optimal timing for the first stage is in 2031. So 3 to 4 years later than the step change scenario. And you can see in a slow change scenario that the timing for the first stage is probably 34, a little bit later in there. But what we've done and what the ISP points out with its decision rules is saying, rather than picking an optimal timing at this point in the project and saying, well, okay, given that range, let's pick the, say, the average, what we want to do and what we're proposing to do is to use effectively real option value. So as the ISP indicated, and we agree, let's proceed, and what we recommend is let's proceed with the early works to make sure that we're able to build Marinus and have it in service by 27, if that's where the market evolves to, or leave the option open to delay that to 2031 if the other scenarios eventuate in there. So we're not locking in at this point in time to a fixed commissioning date. What we're saying is, and our analysis backs us up in saying, let's proceed with the early works and let's keep our options open around the timing. And that's where the decision rules that are flagged in the ISP come into effect. We will be testing those decision rules to say which of these scenarios do we think we're in, which is the optimal timing. That decision rule process is actually conducted by AMO, so there's an independent party looking at that and then giving the tick or otherwise to whether we are actually have satisfied those decision rules. One thing that's worth flagging in this analysis is that we have used the ISP total cost. So that's an increase from the cost that we use in our PATA. So we're now using 3.15 billion for the analysis purposes. And that's a different number to the 3.5 billion that is our headline figure for the overall project. That's because the ISP and the RIT-T guidelines indicate we should be using an expected or median value for our cost estimate rather than that plus contingencies in there. It's interesting that even under the slow scenario, while we might not have an optimal timing for 2031, Marinus still does deliver significant market benefits in that year. Okay, I'll go to the next slide, thanks. So I've talked about the benefits in terms of NPVs. Let's talk about where those benefits actually come from. So the first stage of Marinus, the first 750 megawatts, that is really making available to the rest of the NEM the firming capability and dispatchable capacity of the existing hydro system in Tasmania. Even with Basslink, with the 500 megawatts it has, there's and Tasmanian load, particularly over summer, which tends to be lower, there's enough capacity in the existing network and the existing capacity of the hydro system, and allowing for some of the scheduled upgrades to those hydro schemes to supply an additional 750 megawatts of firming capability into the mainland. Also, that first stage allows development of additional wind in generation in Tasmania that wouldn't occur otherwise because the existing Basslink is constrained. So what our modelling shows is that we get an additional 900 odd megawatts of Tasmanian wind built, which also adds to the business case and the economic value that Marinus brings to the NEM by providing diverse wind compared to the mainland, as well as effectively allowing the hydro generation in Tasmania to be repurposed. And so the wind will provide Tasmanian load when it's windy, and that allows water and those storages to be kept to be used at those times when firming capacity is required in there. The second stage of Marinus is really orientated and derives its benefits by giving access of the NEM to long duration pumped hydro storage. Tasmania has some inherent natural advantages in terms of pumped hydro. Our topology and our existing hydro schemes allows us to build lower cost pumped hydro in Tasmania and longer term or deeper storage pumped hydro compared to the mainland opportunities. And that's really, we see storage is about 2/3 the cost of an equivalent storage on the mainland, just because we've got existing reservoirs, so you don't have to build so many dams to make a pumped hydro scheme available there. The second stage of Marinus also enables further wind development in Tasmania in there. So in terms of the overall benefits, on the right hand side it shows the makeup of the benefits classes in there. What we see, and actually it's a little bit unusual, I think we're seeing a shift in RIT-Ts if people have been following various economic or justification of various projects over time. Marinus shows that the largest benefits actually accrue from capital cost deferrals, and with the second largest being avoided fuel costs. So that's driven by the fact that for the first link, we've already got the generation already installed here. Now, the generation already exists, and it's about just making it available to the rest of the NEM. And for the second stage, that pumped hydro is a lower cost build than equivalent on the mainland. And so that's where the largest benefits occur. Being deep storage that will be provided, both the existing hydro and the pumped hydro, that also means that the NEM needs to burn less fuel, gas in particular, in providing those firming. So that's what's driving those larger benefits. Okay, next slide, thanks. I think he's jumped one. Okay, and this one, just to quickly flag, and certainly I've always read the report to find more detail here. We've done a range of sensitivities to ensure the robustness of our analysis. So not only do we look at a range of scenarios, which look at a range of economic development paths, load profiles, and load growth and DER, we've also then gone and done a range of sensitivities on the relevant scenario, just to stress test some of the analysis. And what these analysis shows is that under all these stress tests, Marinus still delivers a positive NPV, a positive net market benefits across all the sensitivities. Okay, next slide, thanks. So one of the questions, I guess, that we've asked and why we're focused particularly on the step change scenario and the early works is the question about, are we actually already in the step change world? We've looked at a couple of indicators that I think that for us suggest that actually the step change scenario is actually quite likely to be the more likely scenario going forward. And two things that we're seeing as driving us that direction. Firstly, the amount of renewable energy uptake that we're seeing. Now we've had the recent announcements of the New South Wales energy policy that's really promoting accelerating wind generation and solar generation in New South Wales. We've also just heard about the Victorian plans and part of their COVID recovery and accelerating and promoting renewable energy zones in Victoria. These sort of initiatives and government policies are really going to keep the development and planting of renewable generation in the NEM along that trajectory that we see is driven by the step change scenario, or modelled in the step change scenario. So we're seeing the renewable energy being invested in, and what we see on that is that, and the picture on the right hand side here shows how the likely impact of all this additional renewable generation is going to be to make larger volatility and variability of the thermal generation it remains in the NEM, putting a significant financial pressure on their viability. So should they close earlier because of this increase in uptake of renewables, variable renewables, then we're likely to see a trajectory of coal closures that more aligns with the step change scenario than, say, the central scenario. So we think that's a pretty strong indicator for us that being prepared early, having the insurance value of being able to have Marinus built by 20 and in service by 2027 is a prudent thing for the NEM. Okay, last slide for me. Thanks, Pratik. Okay, so this is just a bit of a recap of the outline of our timeline. So you can see here we published, as mentioned before, published our report on the 5th of November. We're asking for submissions, please, by the 7th of December, which we'll then aim to publish on our website shortly thereafter. And we're looking at taking on board those submissions and publishing our conclusions report in the first half of 21, followed closely by then going through the AEMO for the feedback loop with AEMO for the early works expenditure, noting that early works expenditure will only be recovered once the fair pricing is resolved. Okay, I've almost kept us close back on time. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks very much for that, Stephen. And again, some great questions coming in from the audience. So thank you for tuning in and participating in that way. Would now like to have a presentation from Claire Giacomontonio, who is a director at EY, and she is in the electricity market modelling team. She'll take us through a bit more of a deep dive, the background analysis as part of our supplementary report. Thanks very much, Claire.
Thank you. So today I'm going to do as deep a dive as I can in the short amount of time, but give you just a general overview of some of the modelling methods we've used, input assumptions in particular, how those change relative to the PATA modelling, and of course some interesting outcomes. So next slide, please, Pratik. So we have used the exact same core model as we used in the PATA. It's really just the input assumptions that have changed to better align with AEMO and more recent policy announcements, I guess, and forecasts. So this is just an overview of the modelling method for those who are not familiar with the RIT-T style least cost modelling, and who perhaps haven't been with us on the journey through the PSCR and the PATA. So the model that we've used is a least cost generation expansion plan, and that is what is stipulated by the AER RIT-T guidelines, and it is conducted in hourly time sequential resolution, and it solves dispatch over 21 years at that hourly resolution simultaneously. And what the solution is, it is the development plan that minimises the cost of supply to meet demand subject to other constraints. So it determines the generation of all plant and discharging of storage, the commissioning of new plant, retirement of existing plant to avoid FOM and fuel and other variable costs. And it, of course, is subject to other operational constraints and policy constraints. So things like minimum loads, generator availability, emissions constraints, renewable energy targets. The model uses 9 years of historical traces for hydro inflows, wind and solar availability, and also demand shape. And those traces include some concurrent wind and hydro drought years. And overall, this model is very much consistent with the model that AEMO uses for the integrated system plan. It is a different piece of software though. So as Stephen said, it's quite encouraging that we do see the same similar outcomes when we use the same inputs, because they are designed to be very much the same model following similar guidelines. And in terms of RIT-T outcomes, what we do is we simulate the world in these different scenarios, both with and without Marinus link, and then we look at the difference between those two states of the world, and we can compute the RIT-T benefits. So those are things like differences in fuel consumption, differences in voluntary and involuntary load curtailment, investment in new generation and storage, network losses, fixed and variable operating costs, and res expansion costs are captured there too. Next slide, please, Pratik. So why did we do this modelling? Well, as Stephen said, it was really done in response to stakeholder feedback on the PATA modelling, which was published in November 2019. So that was just before the draft ISP was released in December last year. And most of the inputs to the PATA were based on an early draft of AEMO's input assumptions to the 2020 ISP. But of course, the world moved on, as it already has moved on since we've published this modelling. And so this modelling was really undertaken to align with the input assumptions that went into the final ISP that was published in late July this year. Some of the assumptions were actually updated though, and we chose to deviate from what AEMO did, and that was to incorporate more recent information. And that's what's just captured in this table here. So we did in fact use the ESU 2020 demand outlooks, and those include some estimation of COVID-19 impacts on the demand outlook in the NEM. But using those forecasts necessitated shortening our modelling window, unfortunately. So we've kind of only going to 2041, 42, but we thought that was a worthwhile trade-off to get that newer demand outlook. We did align on most other inputs. So in particular, the renewable and pumped hydro storage build limits, those were much higher than was what was in the PATA, and we aligned with AEMO there. And also the CapEx outlooks, in particular for battery storage and pumped hydro, because the final ISP had lower battery CapEx and higher pumped hydro costs. And so we were keen to capture that. And then, as mentioned earlier as well, we did actually include the TRET across all scenarios. It was not in any scenarios in the PATA. AEMO only included it in 2 of their scenarios in the ISP, but as you know, that was legislated recently, and so in anticipation of that legislation, we actually incorporated that across all scenarios. Now, as you'll very much appreciate, this is a moving target. There's been some very big recent announcements, including today, and I'll reflect on those in a few slides, and we can also talk in Q&A, of course. I did, just before you move on, Pratik, sorry, just wanted to mention that we did benchmark our modelling against the ISP, when we had assumptions as aligned as possible, and under those conditions, our model outcomes had an optimal timing for Marinus link, which was quite closely aligned with AEMO's timing across all 5 scenarios. All right, next, please. So I just want to highlight some of the differences in the outcomes relative to the PATA modelling. So this chart on the right here shows differences for the kind of most comparable scenarios between the PATA and the current work. And so that's the current central scenario against the PATA status quo scenario. And these are both with Marinus link scenarios, but the trends are very much the same across scenarios. So at the starting point of the modelling, 2021-22, we started out with some additional capacity in the form of newly committed renewable and storage projects that have been, got that committed status since the PATA, and also some minor thermal upgrades that have been committed at some of the coal-fired generators. By 2030-31, the changes in the input side are more significant. So overall, there's a reduced demand outlook relative to what we saw in the PATA, and that's coupled with an increase in the forecast for distributed PV and domestic storage uptake. So that's most of what you see above the 0 there. And there's also been a bit of a change in some of the coal retirement schedule. And the net effect then is a reduced need for new capacity and that takes a form of 5 gigawatts less new wind and grid scale solar relative to what we saw in the pattern this year. By the end of the study, there's actually 23 terawatt hours lower operational demand relative to what we saw in the pattern modelling. And this results in a reduced need for new entrant gas and renewable capacity relative to the pattern modelling. There's also a redistribution of storage between pumped hydro and the grid scale batteries, and that's because of those changes in the CapEx projections that I just mentioned previously. So that battery CapEx is lower, pumped hydro CapEx is higher, and we see less pumped hydro installed and more batteries, but still need that storage. But furthermore, that lower battery CapEx in particular completely removes the need for new gas capacity to meet peak demand, although the existing gas capacity remains an important part of the least cost outlook. Okay, next slide, please. So just wanted to dig into a bit more detail onto just really illustrating the scale of the transition that the NEM's going to go through as the coal-fired generation retires. So this is very similar to some of what Eli showed from AEMO's modelling, which, as we said, is quite encouraging. And what I'm showing here is just the step change scenario. That's because, as Stephen said, this is the scenario with the earliest need for Marinus Link, and this work is all about demonstrating, the need for the early works to retain the option of building Marinus in, 2027, 28, in the event that step change world eventuates. So in the step change world, we have 92% of the current coal-fired generation fleet assumed to retire by 2041-42. And you can see then wind and solar and rooftop solar, which are the top 3 colours on that left-hand chart, they grow from around 30 gigawatts capacity at the start of the study to 125 gigawatts by 2040-41. The grid scale domestic battery, grid scale and domestic battery storage, they both increase very significantly. So by the end of the study, there's 11 gigawatts in total across those storages. And pumped hydro is also very significant. By the end of the study, there's 10 gigawatts of pumped hydro forecast to be installed across the NEM. You can see in that left-hand chart, the amount of dispatchable capacity remains fairly steady, and that's very much what AEMO showed as well. And also consistent with AEMO, then it's really that the bulk energy is forecast to come from those variable renewable sources. So if you look at those pie charts on the, or donut charts, I guess, on the right, you can see that in the study start, we have in total around 32% of energy coming from wind and grid and distributed solar, whereas by the 2040-41, it's up to 78%. So it's a very significant transition. And in this world, interconnection and storage are of great value for taking advantage of diversity in renewable resources and shifting energy from the time of generation to the time of use. So, just back one, sorry, or you can move on actually. I just wanted to make that point then about the recent policy and project announcements, such as New South Wales RES and pumped hydro development roadmap and Victorian batteries, Victorian RESs. They are actually fairly consistent with what the modelling is forecasting. They are different in timing relative to any given scenario, I think. And so consequently, once they're incorporated into modelling, they will potentially alter the optimal timing of new interconnectors, including Marinus Link. But really, so far, there are no game changers in terms of the overall transition that we're expecting that we've actually sampled across those scenarios. And, as Stephen and Bess have signalled, TAS Networks are really not trying to lock in funding for a particular timing now. It's about having that option to build if we need Marinus, and we can make that decision later for relatively low cost now. Next slide, please, Pratik. So in terms of gross market benefits, this is an annual version of the donut that Stephen showed, I guess, and it shows the sources of the gross benefits from Marinus Link. And you can see this chart starts at 2027-28, and you can see those benefits accruing right from the first year that Marinus Link Stage 1 is commissioned. And the major categories of market benefits are that CapEx and associated FOM savings from deferred and redistributed build profile for storage and renewable investment. And then in green there, you can see the fuel cost savings, and that arises predominantly from reduced use of the existing gas-powered generators with Marinus Link. And Stage 1, Marinus, when those benefits are a bit lower, that is unlocked primarily just through better use of the existing conventional Tasmanian hydro and on-island renewable energy development. And it's with that second stage then that unlocks the longer duration pumped hydro that's forecast to be built in Tasmania as part of the least cost plan. Okay, next slide, please. Because storage is such an important part of the future that we're forecasting, I just wanted to drill down a bit and highlight the amount of storage forecast. So in the forecast, gas and conventional hydro capacity stay about constant, and that dispatchable coal capacity, which is the solid black line there, as it declines, it's really replaced with additional dispatchable capacity in the form of batteries and pumped hydro. And I'll just point out that a lot of that purple chunk, which is the domestic and grid scale batteries, a lot of that is actually pre-committed in the input assumptions rather than installed by the model based on economics. The optimal mix of storage built around that assumed domestic uptake is a combination of both shallower and deeper storages, and each has a slightly different role in the future of the NEM. So the shorter term storage, that's up to around 6 hours, they operate on a fairly consistent daily cycle to meet just the daily peak operational demand. And throughout the 2030s, I think this is from 2037, but it's pretty consistent throughout the late 2020s and 2030s actually. On the right, you can see the operational profile of shallower and deeper storages in New South Wales. And you can see that for the shallower storages, which is the purple line, that 90% of battery generation occurs from between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. and about 27% occurs just in the hour from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And that stands in contrast to the deeper storages, which spread generation out throughout the evening, overnight and into the morning. So between those hours of 5 p.m. and 10 p.m, we're now seeing only about 50% of daily generation occurring. So you can see the short-term storages are really responding to that daily fluctuations in customer need, while those longer-term storages are responding to the short-term variability in the availability of the variable renewable energy generators, which is, of course, solar is a big one that's missing overnight. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show also that even deeper storages also have a role in riding through weather patterns that are associated with widespread reduction in renewable generation. And it's those much deeper, longer term pumped hydro storages and the conventional hydros that play this role. So on the right there, you see two recent low pressure systems. And you can see that they have very widespread cloud coverage, and depending on cold fronts, etc., they can also be associated with low wind availability. And you know, the NEM needs storages to be able to ride through these events. So what you can see on the left is a forecast 5-day period in New South Wales. It's in July 2037. And what happens on the in the middle of this 5-day period, the majority of the NEM experiences a wind drought of around 30 to 36 hours, depending on the region. So I'll just walk you through that in some more detail. So the black dotted line shows the New South Wales operational demand. And typically you see these orange blobs, very similar to what Eli showed, where in the middle of the day, those orange blobs are the solar generation. Coal is chugging along in black on the bottom there. Actually, because this is a step change scenario, only Mount Piper remains in service in New South Wales, and it goes down to minimum load during some of those high solar hours. The wind output is shown in green, and you can see from Thursday evening through to Friday night, it drops very low. So it goes below 1% of installed capacity at times. And that low wind period coincides with overcast day that lowers the solar output on Friday down to less than a quarter of the average production for that week. And in lighter green on the top, you can see that New South Wales is a net importer of energy across its interconnectors throughout that week. So on Wednesday, in the lead up to this weather event, you can see that New South Wales is importing to operate the pumped hydro pumps and charge its batteries. And then on Friday, when we're in this low wind, low solar period, New South Wales is importing to serve New South Wales demand. So where that one is on Thursday evening, you can see that demand is being met by those remaining thermal generators, along with the conventional hydro, the short and long-term storages, and up to 4 gigs of import from adjacent regions with excess energy. But then throughout Friday, those shorter term storages are depleted, and it's the long-term storages that are able to partially generate for 34 hours straight, and then accompanied by imports from adjacent regions remaining high. New South Wales can get through that event there is a bit of DSP on the top there as well. That's demand side participation. And so you can see that in these instances, the dispatchable capacity from the deeper storage, as found in Tasmanian conventional hydro, Tasmanian and mainland pumped hydro, and of course Snowy 2 being one of those, are absolutely critical. And interconnection also plays a critical role in sharing the resources between the regions in the lead up to this weather event and to charge those storages, and also during the weather event. So next slide, please, which I'll probably mostly skip over, I think, in the interest of time. So, I've hopefully demonstrated the need for deeper storages, but there has still been questions asked by some stakeholders on, well, why use pumped hydro for those deep storages instead of multiple shallower storages used in series? And of course, the answer is cost. The least cost optimization model installs those 12 and 24-hour pumped hydros because they are cheaper than stacking the operation of batteries. The model would do that if that was lower cost. So there's a worked example here. It's also in the TasNetworks report that really lays out why pumped hydro is cheaper than stacked batteries if you need that deeper storage, and that those calculations are largely centered around the fact that you really do need to consider the replacement cost of the batteries. But basically, it comes out that if you need 12 hours of storage, then 3 4-hour batteries comes out at over double the cost of pumped hydro, a 12-hour pumped hydro in Tasmania. So final slide, please. Yep. So finally, I just want to give you a bit more of a real example of how Marinus Link actually unlocks the diversity of the renewable energy resources and the optimal use of the existing and new deep storages in the NEM. So on the right here, you can see this is a zoom in on 3 of the 5 days I showed earlier in New South Wales. So New South Wales is now on the top right, and now I'm showing Tasmania for the same period on the bottom right. So you can see what's going on. And so if you look at where that number 1 is on Wednesday midday, during the day, Marinus Link enables Tasmania to use low-cost generation to replenish the pumped hydro storages in Tasmania and actually serve Tasmanian demand. So you can see it winding back the generation on the conventional hydros and running Tasmania really on import, conserving that water for better, more optimal use later on. And so in that period marked with a 2, you can see that combination of existing conventional hydro and new entrant pumped hydro storage in Tasmania being utilised during that day of low mainland supply by large exports on Marinus Link. So that's that large green negative value in the lower right chart. Okay, so you can see that, you know, that operation of Marinus Link really is very dynamic in how it works to better, you know, unlock that better utilisation of the conventional hydro and that longer duration new pumped hydro as well. So finally, I just wanted to make sure you're all aware where our report exists, and accompanying that report are workbooks that show annual outcomes in terms of capacity outlook, generation outlook and market benefits across all 5 scenarios, both with and without Marinus Link. And I think there's actually even 2 different timings of Marinus Link as well. So you can go and have a dig around in all the data if you like, get your hands very dirty, and you can come back and ask TasNetworks and ask questions about that as needed. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, Claire. Thank you very much. A lot of great information to get through there, and we appreciate your time staying on to join with our panel session, which we are now entering into, and appreciate we're running just a little over time. We did allow a little bit of time at the start for people to join, but if you're able to stay on for 5 or so minutes after 12:30, please do. We'll continue our session to go a little over time as well. So thanks for all of those presentations, going from the context setting, project overview, then into the analysis and the deeper dive analysis. I think we're ready now for our panel session with some great questions that have come in. So again, just joining us for the panel is Bess Clark, the General Manager of Project Marinus, Claire Giacomantonio from EY, we've got Eli Pack from the Australian Energy Market Operator, and Stephen Clark from Marinus Link. Thanks very much to the panel for joining us, and thank you to the participants of the forum for asking your great questions. I'll now turn to those. There's been some voting that's been occurring, so questions of priority have floated to the top, but we are pretty confident we should be able to get to most of those that we've now registered. So thank you for those. Now, it looks like quite a lot of interest in particularly some of the announcements that have been occurring of late from state governments. So we've got a very, very busy and dynamic national electricity market, but also a very busy and dynamic policy environment across each jurisdiction of the NEM. We started out with some big announcements from New South Wales. We've also now seen from yesterday in the Victorian state budget some major commitments to unlocking new renewable energy zones there, and as Claire pointed to, some progress on the Project Energy Connect project. So some questions are coming in, panel, on the impact of those, particularly those state-based incentives, some that do include deep storage and pumped hydro. So I might go first to Eli on that context. How does this affect Marinus Link, or how does it affect other projects that are being progressed in the NEM? Thanks, Eli.
Thank you, and it's a great question. I think it's on everyone's minds at the moment, just because so much is happening. There's also been announcements to fund renewable energy zones in Queensland. So I think and just the other day, an announcement to underwrite early works on the VNI West. So when you start to consider all that's happening in this area, I think that's really, from a wider view, it's an indicator that we're in a fast or step change scenario. I wouldn't say we definitely are, but there are certainly positive indicators that we're in that sort of scenario. And what we found in our ISP modeling was that those are the scenarios where we need Marinus Link most, where we need to unlock storages across the system and increase interconnection. So I can't comment on an individual policy because there's been so much happening. But what I will say is that we are currently consulting on our inputs, assumptions, and scenarios for the next ISP. In just a couple of weeks' time, we're targeting the 11th of December. We're publishing a report that will consult on how we treat all of those settings, policies, parameters into the next ISP. And I hope that that will help inform the next series of investments and also these investments that are underway and that will take quite some years before final investment decisions are made.
Great, Eli, thank you. And thank you too for the great question. It's a segue or a flow on there. There's some specific questions here around what's the impact Marinus has on particular projects such as Snowy 2.0, the offshore wind development proposal on the southeastern coast of Victoria, Star of the South. Perhaps, Claire, I might go to you in terms of that sort of modelling work you've been undertaking. What's Marinus's effect on some of these other storage and generation projects?
So our model did incorporate Snowy 2 within the modelling. We don't have Star of the South in there, but there is very significant uptake of wind within the model. So we tend to see that if you commit more projects, then the model, it's either in line with what's already within the least cost forecast, or it is the model very quickly catches up. So I wouldn't anticipate that incorporating Star of the South would necessarily make a huge difference. So what the model does is, optimizes the use of all those storages simultaneously and the interconnectors. And so, Snowy 2 is very much within there. I guess if Snowy 2 was removed from the model, I would think that it would only improve the outlook for Marinus Link, although I don't think we've actually modelled that.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Thanks for parking that potential future piece of analysis. Another sort of related question too, great question. So Marinus Link proposes to come into the Latrobe Valley around the Hazelwood area, and a question has come that relates to other projects that are being proposed in that Gippsland region. And now, as we noted yesterday with the Victorian Government's announcement of a new sort of focused renewable energy zone in Gippsland, will there be a trigger for network developments or upgrades on that 500 kV backbone in the Hazelwood area as a result of not just Marinus Link, those other projects such as Star of the South? So I might go initially to Stephen Clark, but then Eli, just to give you a heads up, I know you're a national planner, but AEMO being the Victorian jurisdictional planner for transmission, perhaps just get your view on that after Stephen's. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, look, the Latrobe Valley is a great spot for Marinus to connect because there is so much transmission infrastructure already there. There's 4 500 kV transmission lines or circuits heading to the Hazelwood substation or switching station. So there's going to be plenty of capacity in the future because what we're seeing, as probably people realise, is that the coal that's currently there is going to retire over the long haul, and so we've already seen the Hazelwood power station retire, which was 1600 megawatts. And so as that coal fleet and even some of the gas generation that's there that retires, that will make space for the renewables that are forecast to come into that area. So I guess it depends on how big the ambitions are, but certainly the numbers that were floated around of around 5,000 megawatts, I think, in APRs, that's certainly capable of being carried on the existing network, from my understanding.
And I was going to say the exact same thing, and I think Stephen probably said it better than I could have. So I'll just nod my head.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for that very efficient response, Eli. Thank you for that too. Some more questions coming in, so just bear with me while I wrap my head around those and look to try and group some of them up, because there are some similar themes emerging. I might go to a sort of particular question, perhaps Bess Clark. There's a question here relating to the staging of Marinus Link. Is it actually more cost effective to stage as opposed to building, I presume in the question is, in a concurrent manner, the two stage 750 megawatt cables?
Thanks, Ben. I guess there's two drivers, pardon me, for staging. So the first one is the work we've just talked through in terms of when the market need emerges. So you don't want to build, spend money on infrastructure before the market needs it. So I guess our assessment is that Marinus Link, the first 750 megawatts, supports the market as some coal-fired generation retires, and the second one sort of stops us needing to build gas as more generation retires. So there's sort of one driver is actually when does the market need it. So there's obviously a cost of building too early, so that's one of the costs. But the other thing is that the markets for HVDC cable, there's a small supply internationally of that specialist cable. So there's actually some cost advantage of staging it, because you've got more access to more capacity in that supply, and similarly for the transmission that supports it. So I guess our assessment is that there's cost benefits of staging it relatively close together. The further apart you get, you lose some of the economies of scale from some of your approvals and procurement processes. So I guess our assessment is a 2 to 3 year staging looks about right, and it also seems to line up with when the market needs it. I don't know if Stephen had any more expert advice on that, given he's closer to this cost as inputs.
I think I'll take Eli's approach and just nod. No, that's right. We've actually engaged with suppliers, international suppliers of HVDC equipment, and what Bess says is backed up with detailed engagement discussions with suppliers.
Great, thank you. Now, there's some follow-on questions too, just from the presentations and the responses around some of the government initiatives and those announcements. I guess there's a question here around being a bit more specific to the policy, and just bear with me here. The questions are rolling in, and I go to find them, and they've moved on me. More specific on that policy change, a faster build of pumped hydro, I guess underwritten by those government investments. Does that obviously compete then with the timing for Marinus Link in that stage 1 development? So perhaps I might go back to you, Stephen, on that front, but then perhaps get a comment again from Eli and Claire.
Yeah, so I guess the various announcements, I think there's two competing things here, so it's actually quite hard to actually pick how it will turn out, to be frank. But so the more, I guess, wind and solar that gets introduced into the market, and them increases the risk of coal closing earlier and the need for firming capacity in Marinus earlier in there. We certainly analysis when we look at timing of other interconnectors, particularly VNI West, they don't actually have a large impact on the optimal timing of Marinus. They actually are quite complementary projects. And as Claire sort of flagged, what you're seeing is all the NEM regions working together. So storage in Tasmania working together with Victoria to supply New South Wales when it has a VRD, variable renewable energy drought in there. So the different timings of the different interconnectors really doesn't have a big impact on the optimal timing of Marinus. Potentially timing of different pumped hydros, deep pumped hydro storages may have an impact around the timing of Marinus. But I think the big picture, when you go back to Eli's presentation about the volume of deep storage required. There's an awful lot required in there. So I'm not expecting big changes in the timing by the various announcements.
Perhaps Eli, just a comment from you.
Yeah, so I agree with all that. I would expand that there is only a finite need for storage. So if there were so many initiatives across the NIM that you had ample storage in every region, then there would be a reduced need for storage from Tasmania. However, we do see a lot of value from Marinus Link in exporting very high quality wind from Tasmania. And the fact of the matter is, within our modelling, if we have a legislated TRET, it will be about what's the cheapest way to get to 200% in those scenarios where we include TRET. And there's only so many ways to export energy from Tasmania.
Claire, did you want to add anything to that before we move to another question?
I guess the only other thing to add is that, we expect the optimal development plan to be rejigged. And so there are some further interconnector assumptions baked into the scenarios. For example, the Q&I medium and large developments, as well as, of course, B&I West, that the optimal timing of those might change to when we incorporate some of these more recent announcements into the modelling. But otherwise, generally concur with everything that Eli and Stephen said.
Great, thank you. And maybe just to finish off on that general theme, perhaps it's a little bit of a political query here, but Bess Clark, could you just comment on Victoria's announcements yesterday? No explicit mention of Marinus Link. From your perspective, do you see that the Victorian government is supportive of this project?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks. Yeah, so I saw Lily D'Ambrosio spoke at the AFR's Energy and Climate Forum this week, and she was pretty upfront that she's focused in the first instance on projects within Victoria, creating Victorian jobs and Victorian energy security. However, if you look at the detail of the announcement from the Victorian government, it's building on the work AEMO has done in Victoria and its plan for Victoria, which clearly shows Marinus as part of the interconnection that is supporting Victoria. And in the meetings we've had with various Victorian government stakeholders, there is support for Marinus, and to be frank, there's probably a strong desire to see some of the other projects in Victoria also progress, such as B&I West. And as Stephen and others have indicated, B&I West is very complementary to Marinus. So so I think there is support. I think that it's fair to say that Victoria at the moment is a little bit more focused on stuff that's just within Victoria, though. So.
Sure. Now, appreciating the time, there's still more questions coming in. It's a big question. It's one of the sort of ultimate challenges of the project. In your presentation, Bess, just to be quite particular, slide 10 highlights what one of the participants sees as a major risk around resolving the cost allocation methodology. What happens if that issue is not resolved? What's the contingency on this project if a fair cost allocation methodology is not resolved for Marinus Link?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, well, it's a condition precedent for the project to proceed. So we need to have things like environmental approvals, and we need to have a fair and reasonable pricing model. So we're doing the work to shore that up. There are a whole range of ways that could be achieved. However, it needs to be achieved for the project to proceed.
Fantastic. And maybe I might go to Eli just to expand on that, or from AEMO's perspective.
Thank you. And I presented a slide with a roadmap that showed what we would do and how we would change our pathway and our decisions, but it was briefly shown and it's a high resolution image. But in the ISP, we do outline a plan if Marinus does not go ahead, and it involves delivering some degree of firm generational storage in Tasmania and delivering B&I West before your lawn closes, or at least by 2035, 36, I think.
Thank you, Bess. Thank you, Eli, for those responses and really great questions coming in. I know that there are some now sort of quite particular ones to the modelling. There's also some particular ones to the configuration of assets here in Tasmania. Some of those, I think, just due to time, we may need to deal to offline. We will definitely be getting to those questions. And maybe just for one more to the panel while we've got you. It's probably quite topical, the role of gas. There's just a query really in terms of our modelled assumptions. What is that role of gas in a step change scenario as we see the model pan out over those coming years? Perhaps I'll go to Claire for that first response.
Yeah, hi. So I'm just reading the question there from Jack, and it talks about, is that the one I'm addressing? Because it particularly talks about the firming capacity provided by new build gas generation and operation in the absence of Marinus link. And that's actually, that was more something that we saw coming out in the PADA. But in this updated modelling that's now aligned with the final 2020 ISP input assumptions, we actually don't see new build of gas. Without Marinus link, we do see more reliance on existing gas generation. And so then with Marinus link, that's where some of those fuel cost benefits come from reducing some of that use. I think that's consistent with the ISP, although Eli might like to comment on that too.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing as well. We didn't do a with without Marinus link in our step change. We did a with without TRET in our central. The differences may be nuanced, but absolutely we saw a very strong role for the existing gas-powered generation to play, but I would say a stronger role for energy storages moving forward in providing the new firming services that would be required in addition to interconnector upgrades.
Thank you for those responses. I guess just due to popular demand, and I again appreciate the time overrun, and for those who are still with us, I'll ask this final question, which relates again to, well, there are now two competing priority questions to answer. I might go to the one that got in first. So battery cost and pumped hydro cost comparisons. Did the comparison include a degradation in the performance of batteries in that cost comparison? It just wasn't mentioned, and the audience is quite keen to understand that difference and whether battery performance degradation was included. So perhaps I might go back to you, Stephen Clark, just to touch on that.
Okay, I was hoping to go to Claire. Yeah, so there's not an explicit modelling of battery degradation. In our report, we actually published the results of our post-modelling analysis that shows how many cycles the batteries do. The assumption, I guess, at the moment is that the cost, both the CapEx and the OpEx costs of batteries includes enough of a margin to replenish or replace bits of batteries that cells that actually start to degrade in there. And but I guess we are a little bit concerned, even though we're using the ISP assumptions in that, and we're aligned with those, we are a little bit concerned that we are probably underestimating the costs around that battery degradation due to the cycling. And I don't know whether Eli, actually I might throw to Eli to talk about whether they've done more work on battery lives and so forth.
Thank you for that. It's not my area of expertise, but and we are about to start consulting on it again, but I understand our normal practice is to model a technical operating life for the batteries and economic operating life for all technologies, and annual operating and maintenance costs. So rather than saying that the battery is getting worse and worse each year, you could alternatively say that there's investment required to maintain the effective life. Yeah, we are just starting consultation on that. So yeah, if you've got any strong views, please get involved.
Thank you. And Claire, did you have a little more to add to that?
Yeah, so one other nuance, so we don't include degradation, as Stephen said, but probably one assumption that is within the ISP assumptions, and we of course use two, that was more favourable to batteries over pumped hydro, was the assumption of the 20-year technical life for the batteries, which is kind of on the high side compared to the current kind of guaranteed life of batteries. I think there's some further discussion of that in TasNetwork's report too. The questioner can read up on.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Now, look, I've had my arm twisted. It's very twistable, and there's still quite a lot of you who are with us. So again, thank you very much for that. I will finish with this question just for time, but it's a great question. We see with Project Energy Connect, the interconnector between South Australia and New South Wales with a little arm into Victoria, its expected CapEx, the capital cost of that, increased by 57%. So what processes does Marinus Link have in place to avoid those sorts of increases? And have we done any sensitivity to see if the project is still viable if those costs of Marinus Link do increase? Now, that's a bit of a shared, so maybe a final contribution from each of the panel members on that. I might start with you, Bess Clark.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so we, as I mentioned at the outset, we've been fortunate that we've had a business case and feasibility assessment phase, and so we've been doing a whole lot of increasingly detailed design considerations and thinking of all the elements of this project, and as Steve mentioned earlier, engagement with suppliers. And the bulk of the project cost for Marinus Link is actually the HVDC and converter equipment, and so we've done a whole lot of engagement to build up those cost estimates, and also there's a whole lot of civil work with installing that equipment. So we certainly don't want to have cost increases in the order of 50%. We want to put forward a RIT-T assessment and ultimately a project that there'll always be a degree of cost variation, and we will have, contingency and level of accuracy as part of our forecasts. However, we want to have a forecast that our business and our customers can be confident in. So I think we're in a really good place that we've been able to do that early work to build up that cost estimate. And to the question with around have we done any sensitivity analysis, yes, we have. And if you look at our supplementary report, we've used the number that AEMO had in its ISP, I think it was 4.2 million from memory. And again, Marinus still provided net benefits at that value, but our goal is to bring this project in at the lowest sustainable cost that we can.
Thank you, Bess. Maybe Claire, just to you for add on to that particular question, but any sort of final remarks?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think I really have anything additional to add there. I think Bess has captured it nicely.
Thank you, Claire. Eli, maybe a comment on that from you?
I would just say that the industry around delivering large-scale transmission has been in hibernation in Australia, probably since Basslink. So we just don't have a lot of sort of points on the curve to draw from, and I think we're all going through a learning curve at the moment. From an ISP perspective, we've engaged consultants to help us improve our process. We're working with the TNSPs to improve their processes, and we triggered a series of investigations on projects that we think might become actionable in the future. So there's a lot of work to go on. Where we'll be consulting next year on our process for cost estimation across the board into the ISP. And yeah, I mentioned earlier, no project should go ahead at any cost. So that will be important to continue to explore and understand and try to improve our cost estimation.
Thank you, Eli. And to Stephen, just to add anything further or any other perspectives before we wrap up?
I think that's just been pretty well covered. I mean, we are, as Bess said, very committed to deliver this project at the lowest sustainable cost. So we're currently going through, I guess, our procurement strategies and market engagement strategies around making sure that we've got the best process and packaging of the project to get really good customer outcomes for customers.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to everyone who has stuck with us through this session. We genuinely hope you've found there's been great insight and good response to your questions. Just a reminder that the submission process to our supplementary analysis report is open until the 7th of December. So we welcome those submissions from you or others in your broader network. We really value the time you've spent with us. We have gone over time, but I think we had a great discussion. More to go and more to come. And a very exciting time to be in this sector. Very dynamic, challenging for all of us, no matter which part you play in the energy mix. So thank you, and we look forward to engaging with you further. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.